John here is from the Socialist Worker Network in Ireland, which is our sister organisation. He's also part of People Before Profit in Ireland, and is the editor of the Irish Marxist Review. Just to say again, John's going to talk for about half an hour, then we've got loads of time for discussion and questions, and then John's going to try and come back at the end to answer some of those. But I'll hand over to John. There you go.
Thanks, Ab. Right, I'll raise it.
Either on or off, John. I'm afraid.
I think off is probably. Right, first off, I'm really happy to be here. I enormously enjoy doing these art meetings at Marxism, and it's great to be back in person and so on. So, this is about Francis Bacon, the art of Francis Bacon, as you can see. Here's some pictures of him. That's a photograph of Bacon by the photographer of Soho at the time, John Deakin. He took lots of photographs of Bacon and similar people. There's a portrait of Francis Bacon by his friend Lucian Freud. And we have a self-portrait of Francis Bacon from 1971. Now, first question, of course, why talk about Bacon at all, especially at a Marxist festival? And there are several reasons for it. I mean, there was a major exhibition of his work in London that some of you may have seen. I would have liked to have seen, but couldn't because of COVID circumstances and so on. But also, I want to talk about him because I think he is, without doubt, a major artist of the 20th century, one of the most significant and powerful artists of the post-Second World War period. And he's also a very challenging artist to deal with. He's very dark. I was kind of joking that, some people might think this would be the light entertainment while the heavy stuff is going on elsewhere. Well, it's not light, I have to tell you. Francis Bacon deals with heavy, dark materials. He was challenging to the left in various ways. A lot of the left in the art world didn't like him. For example, the young John Berger really disliked Bacon. He said he thought he painted to shock, and at one point compared him to Disney by a complicated theory of reasoning. Well, I don't agree with the young John Berger, and the later John Berger changed his mind, I'm glad to say. But he wasn't seen as a kind of a left-wing artist in any way. Nevertheless, what I think you get with Bacon is really powerful expression of what happens to people in life, and as we would say, in class society, in capitalism, and the violence that it does to people. To say that, I'm now going to try and show that, as well as proclaim it. I'll start saying that the approach to artists, to Bacon in particular, but to artists in general, but especially I think to Bacon, is frequently biographical. That is, it's assumed the person was a great artist, now therefore we must be interested in all the details of their life. Slightly like you might be with a pop star or a film star or whatever. So you get a lot, there exists a lot of biographies of Bacon that do this. This is the most recent one, Francis Bacon, Revelations, by Mark Stevens and Annalyn Swan, with many others by Daniel Carson, Francis Pepiat, and so on. Studies of his life, and that was particularly because there was a great deal of focus on the bohemian lifestyle that Francis Bacon lived, particularly in Soho in London in the from the late 40s through the 50s into the 60s. He was a gay man when, of course, that was illegal, an out gay man. He was a heavy gambler and a very heavy drinker, and he spent a lot of time in places like the Soho drinking club, the Colony Room. There he is in it, run by Muriel Belcher, who figures a lot in all the stories about him. There was where he was a regular drinking till all hours, and here in a particularly famous pub in Soho, the French House, has an interesting history, that place in itself, but a lot of the approach again focuses on Bacon's social life. Again, now I just say that in my misspent youth, I was kind of on the fringes of this scene, and I do understand its attractions, but that's not the way I'm going to talk about Bacon. I want to focus on the work and to talk about the pictures. Now, he did 590, I think, paintings over 5 decades, 590 that survived. Many others were destroyed by him, largely. So I can't show you all of them or a representative sample or anything like that. What I'm going to do is to pick on some key examples and look at them in some detail and look at the background to them and try and see what's going on in them, etc. That's how I'm going to approach it. And I'm going to start with this, which is 3 studies for figures at the base of a crucifixion, painted in 1944, which was the first paintings, if you like, it's a triptych, the first work in which he really made an impact in the art world. He'd been around painting for quite a while before, but it was this that had the first impact, made him someone who was talked about and made him into a major player in art. Now, the first and most obvious thing to say about this, when you look at it, is that it's horrific. It's a horrible series of images. These half people, half beasts that we see in front of us. Now, just again, so a bit of background to this. This is one of a whole number of works that Bacon made which have the crucifixion as a theme in one way or another. So going back to 1933, he produced this, influenced by Picasso. Then later he produced this, 3 studies for a crucifixion. I mean, he did probably 20 or 30 of such paintings. I'm not going to show them all, but I just want to show that he was much preoccupied with the question of the crucifixion. Now, and we know that he was influenced by a number of classic paintings. These were things that he looked at and were used, and they were going around in his mind when he was doing them. Most famously, the Matthias Grunwald crucifixion, done 1510 to 1515 at Isenheim, another triptych, and one of the most powerful and dramatic representations of the crucifixion in the history of Western art. He was also influenced by this one, by Cimabue, the early Renaissance artist. If you go back, the kind of twisted figure that you see on the right there is related to that crucifixion by Cimabue. And another image that was always in Bacon's mind was Rembrandt's Slaughtered Ox from 1655. We'll come back to that in various different forms, but which is in a way a crucifixion, as I think you can see. And another image that was going on for him, and that he used to collect photographs. He mainly worked from photographs. He had photographs, all these, in his studio. We know this because they took his studio and reconstructed it in Dublin in the Hugh Lane Gallery, so you can see everything that was in it. Another horrific image that was going on in his mind was the photograph by Edward Muybridge of a paralytic child walking. And Muybridge did a whole series of photographs of people in movement in various forms. So all of these were his choice. He was operating with these in his head at the time that he does the three figures, which we'll come back and look at a little bit more. And we'll find, as we look at Bacon, you find that there are various themes that keep reappearing in different combinations, reflecting his ongoing concerns and engagement with certain issues. Now, so this is, to repeat, this is 3 studies for figures at the base of a crucifixion. Now, in biblical terms, that immediately raises the question of who is at the base of the crucifixion, and it would normally be you'd think of the Roman soldiers. And then, what did the Roman soldiers do? They played lots, they gambled for Jesus's cloak, which was divided amongst them. They cast lots for it. So this is one kind of reference that we get when we talk here, except we have to remember that Bacon was explicitly atheistic. He said the crucifixion didn't have religious overtones for him. It was about what people do to people. He himself said that. So that was what he was concerned with here. Now look again at this image. First of all, the one on the left. Right. What do we see? Well, the one on the left has a phallic quality. They all have a phallic quality to them. The one on the left is part person, part bird, maybe vulture-like. The one in the centre, again a phallic quality, but also like a rump, again like a bird on a perch, but with the horrible image of a mouth, with the eyes covered over, blindfolded, as it were. And the one on the third, which is the one that I think recalls at some level the paralytic child, is a kind of dog-like beast, maybe, with the horrible, ravening, maybe rabid dog, with the mouth upturned, with the ears but no eyes. So they're really images that are about the transformation, I think, of people into something really horrible. Now, then you put this in context. This is done in 1944, and you think what is happening in the world in 1944. And to me, this then becomes an extremely powerful statement of what human beings can, under certain circumstances, become and what they can do to each other. And the last thing we have to remember when we're talking about this and his other crucifixion works, and I'll come back to it again later, is that Bacon said that when you do a crucifixion, it's like doing a self-portrait. And so bear that in mind. We'll come back. We will come back to that point. Now, the second image I want to focus on is known colloquially as the Screaming Pope. It is the study after Velasquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X in 1953. Now, again, we have the phenomenon that he did lots of popes. This is just perhaps the most famous of them, the one I particularly want to focus on, but he did many of them. Head 6, clearly the same figure. Pope 2, 1951. Study of Red Pope, 1962 to 71, and so on. So, and again, there's about 20 or 30. Now, but if we take the Screaming Pope figure, the one that I showed in the first instance, all right, there were two images, particularly in Bacon's mind. There are two images particularly in Bacon's mind when he did this. The first on the left is clearly the portrait by Velasquez of Pope Innocent X, which he considered to be one of the greatest paintings in history, and which shows a pope who is anything but innocent. And the other image on the right, strangely as it may seem, comes from Eisenstein's battleship Potemkin, the scene on the Odessa steppes. And this is the nurse who is screaming in horror, having been shot. So they are both playing there, and you can see them in the central image, how that relates to them. Now let's explore this painting a little bit. The first thing that's kind of a simple fact, really, about this painting is that this could not have been done except in an era and a situation when the power of the church was greatly diminished. You could not have done this painting at the time Velasquez did his painting. It would have been impossible. I don't think it could have been done probably before the 20th century. So it reflects the fact that the power of the church and the whole status of the church had changed for people completely. The other question that arises in relation to this is, why is the Pope screaming? What is he screaming about? What is he screaming at? Well, people can scream for internal and external reasons. They can scream because it expresses how they're feeling. They can scream because of what they are seeing, the horror of what they're seeing. In this case, I think all of these things apply. I think in general, when you have associations, when you're looking at a work of art, associations from a painting that it creates, it's not a question of saying one or the other. It's not like there's a true meaning. Artists don't generally work like this. I'm sure Bacon didn't. An image forms that is powerful precisely because it expresses a lot of things in that image. And here, you can bring together a number of things. First of all, Bacon was born in Ireland and grew up in Ireland. There's a question of the horrific role of the church in Ireland, which he would have been aware of. It wasn't much talked about, but people knew about it. This was the time of the Magdalene laundries, the Christian Brothers, great violence being perpetrated on people, and he would have known about that. It's also the case that a pope, and this was put to Bacon in an interview by the art critic of the time, David Sylvester, the pope is a figure, a father figure. Pope, Papa, kind of Freudian point, if you will. Bacon brushed it away, but it has some relevance here, particularly as Bacon was beaten, horsewhipped by his reactionary father, because he was gay and so on, to try and make a man of him was the idea. So he suffered that as well. And again, you have to put this in the context of 1953 and what is going on in the world. So that's not separate, it's all these things. It's also the fact that this is a world that has had Auschwitz. This is a world that has had Hiroshima. This is a world where there is the possibility of nuclear holocaust and so on. So the decline of the church, the record of the church, Bacon's personal feelings about this, his own experiences, and what is happening in the world, all, I think, to come together to make the Pope scream. One further feature of this painting that I think is important is that although it's based on the Velázquez portrait of the Pope on his throne, the throne becomes kind of cage in Bacon, with those kind of yellow bars, almost like an electric chair. And the line that always comes to my mind when I look at this is the line great line from Bob Dylan from Visions of Johanna, the ghosts of electricity howl in the bones of her face. And I think the same thing, the ghost of electricity howling in the bones of the Pope's face in this painting. The next painting I want to focus on is three figures in a room. Bacon again did a whole series of these triptychs of different people, different circumstances. This was in 1964. Again, you have the triptych form, which he was very fond of, and the subject on the left of the painting is known to be his lover George Dyer, who is depicted on the toilet. Strange circumstances, which I'll come to in relation to how George Dyer later died. But what I want to note here is that each of these figures is shown kind of in a way framed and isolated from each other. In different ways, by being on the toilet, by being on a kind of bed or plinth, by lying on the ground. They're all separated, if you like, alienated from one another. And we find this as a theme that appears again and again in Bacon. So we find, and this is a slightly strange phenomenon, we come to two more works, triptychs, known as the black triptychs, right, which clearly follow on from the first one, with the difference that these were done after the figure on the left here, George Dyer on the toilet, had died in grisly circumstances. He was in the hotel room where Bacon was staying at a major exhibition of Bacon's work at the Grand Palais in Paris, when he died of an overdose of drugs and drink, and died actually on a toilet. And this was happening while Bacon was opening his very important for him show. And these were works that were done the second two were works that were done in response to this. The 72 one and the 73 one. Again, particularly dark paintings exploring dark responses by Bacon. The figure in the middle here is also of interest, because that was also a separate painting there called Two Figures. And again, it related to an image that can be found in the photographs of Edward and Muybridge of wrestlers, that is clearly actually a scene of male lovemaking in one form or another. It was known back in those days among Bacon's circle, and I heard Lucian Freud's daughter call it, they knew it as the buggers, and so on, that painting. So all of those things are going on there and expressive of his feelings. Now, if we move on, Bacon did then a whole number of portraits of people he knew. But there's a common characteristic in them, I think, which is that in each case the figure is depicted on a bed or a table or sometimes a chair or some kind of framing device that makes them separate. This is a study for a portrait of Henrietta Moraes. This is for another friend of his. They were friends of his in the Soho scene and they posed for him often. Isabel Rawsthorne, standing in the street in Soho, 1967. Even when you've got a figure standing in the street, they're still always separated, brought out, framed by some device or another, a circle or a bed or a chair. And this is another one even more so. This is probably Henrietta Moraes as well. Lying figure with hypodermic syringe. You can see there the syringe in her arm. Naked on a bed of sorts and the syringe in her arm. Somewhat prophetic of the way in which Henrietta Moraes later died. And when I was looking at these paintings and what did they signify, what came into my mind were some lines from T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And that's not arbitrary because we know that Bacon was majorly into T.S. Eliot, was reading his poetry, was producing work that was related to them. But I think they capture what these works are about. Eliot wrote, "Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table." And I think that's what the way in which Bacon was painting people. And then from later in the same poem, Eliot writes, "The eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase, and when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the walls." And I think that was the kind of image that Bacon was presenting of people repeatedly in the portraits that he did of them. Another theme that we find in Bacon is the theme of meat. And this appears in various different ways. So he had this photograph taken by the same guy who took the original photograph of him in the Macintosh, John Deacon. Francis Bacon with meat. And then a Pope with meat. And of course, the reference point of this, again, is Rembrandt's Slaughtered Ox. And that is the... And again, Rembrandt's great painting, I think one of the greatest paintings ever done, is, as I said, an image of a crucifixion, and put that back together with Bacon saying that when you do a crucifixion, you do a picture of yourself. It's really a self-portrait. So you can see how all these ideas are awesome. And the suggestion that, you know, when it comes down to it, we are all just flesh and meat is implied in these works. And here you can see another work, painting 1946, where so many of these different themes come together. At the back, you have the slaughtered ox, as it were, there. You have the figure you can't see their eyes, only their mouth under the umbrella, perhaps a kind of city gent or something. And then you have the framing device of below, the kind of cage-like image that they're all part of. Right. And this leads me to my last image, which is going back with a self-portrait. Now, when you look at something like this and start thinking what is being shown here, and in so many of his self-portraits this was the case, it looks almost like someone who has been beaten up, someone who has been smashed up. They have been the subject of a kind of major assault. And of course that did happen to Bacon. That sort of thing did happen to him in his life, and he was sexually masochistic as well, and so on. So he sometimes sought out violence. But that is what we see: someone who is being smashed up and their face mangled. And I'm going to be fine on the time. Now. So it seems to me, and this is my case for Bacon, is that the central theme of his work is the violence and cruelty that life in capitalist society, even if he wouldn't have put it that way, inflicts on people. That he explores what it does to people, but also what people become when they do it to others. This is the recurring theme in his work. And I think that he portrays this violence and cruelty with an unflinching gaze and with exceptional power and intensity. Now, this is open to an objection, one that's quite often made by, if you like, Marxists and Marxist art theorists and criticism. I would call it fundamentally what I would call the Lukács objection. And that is that it's a one-sided view of reality. that in reality people aren't all violent and cruel and so on, that it's a kind of perverse view of the world, and it doesn't reflect the totality of human experience. My view is that artists who have a particularly intense and insightful view into one aspect of life are nonetheless very, very important artists. So you could say Franz Kafka, or Samuel Beckett, or Giacometti, or Jackson Pollock. None of them are presenting us a broad picture, if you like, a balanced view of life and so on, that sometimes people ask for. They're not doing that. They are exploring and expressing with exceptional intensity one aspect of life, and that's what Bacon does. And I think that to look unflinchingly and give such powerful expression to the cruelty of life, which he thought of as a brutal fact, that is in itself a form of resistance to that. That is in itself standing up to that horror. And in the final analysis, not directly immediately, but in the final analysis, I think it helps in the struggle to end that cruelty and oppression. And that's my case, reason for talking about Francis Bacon and why I think he was such an important artist. So.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, John. So we're going to move over to the discussion part of the meeting.
Hi. Thanks, John. Really interesting talk as always. I guess just a few things really. I think the reoccurrence of the triptych is really an interesting feature of Bacon's work, and I enjoyed the way that you referenced Renaissance, ways in which the triptych is used, and obviously it's a kind of classic form that's kind of been questioned throughout modernism in terms of ways of using threes in different forms and works and calling different things triptychs. But I guess I was sort of wondering about how you see that. And I know you did the book Dialectics of Art, and I think there's something kind of interesting about this idea of a kind of dialectical construction or an argumentative kind of formula in the construction of a triptych. I mean, because you have this thesis, antithesis, and then the last one. Synthesis, yes. And you do sense, particularly in the black triptychs, this sense of kind of resolution or synthesis in some of the images, where you have these opposing forms and then a kind of resolving form, which often takes up a kind of more abstract form. And I think the way that abstraction plays into Bacon's work and into this kind of dialectical question is also an interesting one. So I was just wondering what you thought about that. And also I think it's really good that you sort of touched upon the fact that, the way that people interpret these works is, people can talk about it as much as they want, but I think, as you said, the work has its own visual language, and so often visual artworks are subjugated to language, when actually the reason that people make art so much of the time is that it is functioning in its own language and doing what it does in the way that it does it. And it can't really be done in any other way, and that's why the artist would do that. So I think it's good that you kind of hinted at that. But yeah, thank you very much.
So you've got the comrade at the back with the blazer, or in the middle, I should say, and then we're going to have, after him will be the comrade at the back there. Yeah.
Well, perhaps I can just begin by saying that I share with John, the sense of fascination with this work. It's so stunningly original, and I would imagine unprecedented in modern art. But I'm afraid I'm not sure that I could see any basis in the material of these paintings or other Bacon paintings I've seen that the kind of suffering and harsh experience which is being implied by the material is in any way being attributed to capitalism. Certainly in a more general sense, yes, but I don't see any evidence of an attribution of, to capitalism of this.
Thank you. Okay, we've got the comrade at the back there, and then after him will be the comrade from the third back with the Harrison jacket on.
Yeah, thanks. John, part of the recruitment team, I was talking to John before the meeting and thinking, how do you link the art of Francis Bacon to why you should join the Socialist Workers' Party? And I'm not even going to attempt to do that really, because I think it's a bit of a tough gig. So I just want to say a couple of things about this. Was that it made me think, I mean, apart from the fact that obviously the Bacon's, the viciousness and the brutality of the world we live in is absolutely an urge why many of us, and hopefully more of us, will join the struggle. But I also just a couple of thoughts really. I don't know if anybody watches Stranger Things, but what made me think about the images there, people see the demigons, the monsters in Stranger Things are very similar, I think, to some of Bacon's imagery. And again, the whole idea in Stranger Things is the upside down, the fact you have on the surface this, perfectly American town and the rest of it, but underneath there's this horrendous dark side, all sorts of stuff going on, a mirror image almost away in a negative view. So I thought that's really interesting. The other thing I just wanted to say, I think, Marxism does give us when I became a Marxist many years ago, it opened my eyes to all sorts of different things. I'm looking at not just politics, but science, art, history, everything around you, becomes much clearer, I think, with Marxism. And I think it's really interesting. I think there's not many places where you could go to meetings on, the war in Ukraine, the fight against racism, and then meetings like this on Francis Bacon. And I think there's a long tradition of that. If you think about Trotsky's work on art, I think it's a really important reason why, we should be Marxists. And of course, yes, please do join the SWP.
So we got that comrade at the back there, and then we've got a comrade at the front here.
This is more of a question than a contribution, but I was just wondering, I'm sure you know that Bacon's relationship with his father was turbulent, to put it politely, but I was wondering what extent you think that had an effect on his work, especially in relation to the fact of the nuclear family and then therefore capitalism. I was wondering what your personal opinion would be on that point.
Brilliant, thank you very much, comrade. So we got the comrade at the front here, and then we've got the comrade at the back. Sorry to make you run up and down.
Thank you. Well, I was actually considering what the comrade in the middle said about how does it relate to capitalism and such. I feel like you can get a real sense of alienation because there's a lot of heartache, I feel like, a lot of pain, as you mentioned, represented in those stories. And I feel like with alienation that capitalism and class society put in us in general, it makes us focus inward, it makes us focus on the negative and you feel like there is no escape. And I feel like Francis Bacon is expressing that inability to escape that darkness because he hasn't been able to enter that socialist perspective of fighting for something better, fighting for something new. And I feel like you especially see that, especially with the paintings of his friends who were taking drugs and who died because of drugs, because drug, as we know, is an escapism of sorts, and even the abstract way of the paintings and stuff. I know when I've done art and stuff, when I was struggling with my mental health, I was struggling with my gender identity and sexual identity, I was drawing things that were but also abstract. I was looking at myself in an abstract way. When I look in the mirror, I don't see myself the way that society wants me to see myself, and I feel like you see that in the way that Francis Bacon is also doing it. So I feel like there is a really powerful message of being able to look at that real negative aspect of it and then take it forward. Especially, when I look at Crucifixion and stuff, that's something, I come from quite a Christian background, and I feel like the pain happened also in places of occupation and stuff. These people were being tortured. We focus so much, people, especially in Christianity, focus so much on the fact that Jesus is the savior and stuff, without actually focusing on the fact that he's also a revolutionary who was living in an occupation and then was killed by that occupation. And they focus more so on that saved part, which in some ways is a good thing, but it doesn't focus enough on that revolutionary part of that as well. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Hopefully that was organized. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks very much, comrade. The comrade at the back there, and then the comrade in the pink shirt over there. Just there.
Thank you, brilliant. Just one observation. I thought the triptych form in his work is intriguing, isn't it? And the triptych in particular there. But the reading of the triptych is not normally 1, 2, 3, is it? It's like 2, 1, 3. We read it as a whole set. Not a story as such, but that aside, I think a sort of form of a question I'm taking is, to some extent I don't buy it into...
Oh.
Stop. Oh, there you go. The political aspect of what Bacon's doing here, I think, is a bit rather nebulous in as much as the other comparisons you had, and we've just heard from a comrade down there. There's an existentialist aspect about Kafka and Beckett and so on. The work itself is not intrinsically political as such, and it raises questions. My colleague here beside me raised that it's a question of the reading, not the work itself. Bacon was not interested in politics, and neither was Kafka or Beckett in particular. Yes, Beckett was in his early days, of course, but not as in the works. So I think it's a bit of a stretch for me anyway, to attach a political agenda to the works in that respect.
Thanks very much, comrade. So we've got the comrade in the pink shirt there, and then the comrade in the blue jumper.
Sorry? Yeah. Oh, much better. Yeah. Okay. I'll stand still. Yeah. It's interesting hearing people ask about the connection between art and capitalism. I am a scientist, and this is the first time I've seen Francis Bacon's work as well, and I was also kind of looking at it and being like, this is related to politics. But it's a thing where you've got politics everywhere. You've got politics in art, you've got politics in science, etc. And whilst all of us may not understand it, it is very much important in terms of people expressing their emotions and their beliefs through whatever medium that they have. I think it's important to remember Van Gogh. Van Gogh died in poverty. He cut off his own ear and he went insane. But whilst we say that, now looking back at his work as a physicist, it's quite interesting to analyse his work and see that during the days that he was quote-unquote gone mad, those paintings are the most realistic and the most scientifically accurate in terms of fluid dynamics of the way that wind works, the way that water works, and how he adds that in his brushstrokes. And it's the closest that we've seen in art, that you can take mathematically. So it's a thing where maybe all of us might not understand. And I've looked at the paintings and I like the 3-part series, but I've also looked and I don't understand. And that's okay. It's not there for all of us to understand. But for sure, art should be a medium for socialism. It should be a medium for you, even just being able to express your pain, express your experiences. And whilst I feel like I don't fully understand, I can hear the passion from you. And yeah, after me, I'm going to pass it to Robert. Of course.
I just want to throw a little curveball in here. Basically, we're talking about Francis Bacon and the way that he portrays religion and also obviously the Catholic Church. Do you think it might have something to do with the way that he feels the Catholic Church and religion has let down certain sections of society, i.e. disabled people through Act on 4, which you mentioned in your presentation, and also as an Irish person who is gay, he might also feel that the church let that section of society down as well.
Brilliant, thanks very much, comrade. So we've got the comrade in the blue jumper here, and then after them will be the comrade here.
I just want to say a few words about how Francis Bacon's work makes me feel. But I do think the biography of Bacon is important because he lives in a world that I find quite terrifying. And there's nothing in Bacon's life that would have led him to feel any kind of social solidarity in the way that we feel it as workers, as trade unionists. When we come to an event like this, Bacon's life was lived, well, it was lived in the gutters in many respects, although obviously he was a relatively wealthy man and he could frequent high society if he wanted to. He lived in the gutters, he lived on the margins, and he lived close to organised crime and in a very violent milieu. And I sense that in it. That's how those paintings make me feel. You know, to be in front of a Bacon sometimes is quite a frightening experience, I think. And yes, I agree that this does make it great work, and he's a very profound artist, and it's very, very powerful work indeed. But it was interesting that you've never contrasted Bacon with any other work in your exposition, and that's fine. But recently, I don't know if you've seen the post-war modern exhibition, but there was a very interesting contrast between, there's one room which just has Francis Bacon and David Hockney. Now, I'm not revisiting any arguments about David Hockney, but the contrast between the two is really quite interesting, I think, because I stood in front of the Bacon and it's a man in a bar, and it's dark, and I think it reflects the repression of his own sexuality, the inability for him to express his sexuality openly, the homophobia that he's experienced in his life, and the violence that he's surrounded by. So it's a very dark painting. And then it's contrasted with the young Hockney. At this point, Hockney's a young art student, and it's very poppy, but it's very positive. And it has a very positive affirmation of gay love. I think it says love on it, and there's two boys holding hands, and it's reflecting his exuberance in life, his willingness to express his sexuality positively. And that painting makes me feel very differently to Bacon's. It makes me feel positive, and it's a positive affirmation of life. Now, I'm not saying one is better than the other. They are very different. And that's really all I wanted to say.
Thank you. I think it's important to understand the importance. I disagree that John didn't make it clear that how the art of Francis Bacon relates to capitalism, but because of the points around the Catholic Church, the horrors, especially growing up in Ireland, the discrimination, the violence of received by people in the LGBT community at the time, and so on. But I think the importance of Marxist art criticism is highlighted to me when I look at other aspects of art criticism, art that doesn't try to place it in a material position in the material world. And I think back to the first chapter of John Burge's Ways of Seeing, you know, a book that really sparked my interest in Marxist art criticism. And he talks about a painting by Howells, who was a Dutch painter, and it was the last two paintings he did, and he did them in conditions of abject poverty. He painted the patrons of the institution in which he lived, which he was benefiting from, which allowed him to live and were the means of his subsistence. And the faces in these paintings, they are disfigured, they are deformed, they look drunk. And I think for all of us looking at that would say there is a clear political message about these people who are wealthy individuals, throw pittance to the poor and then demand to be painted. I think we can draw strong political arguments. Kenneth Clarke, on the other hand, who is leading art criticism of the liberal tradition in Britain, he rejects that interpretation in a process John Burge calls mystification. He blunts any political conclusions being drawn from this art, or any relation it has to the ways that we live today, and instead chooses to focus on only the lines and so on. And I think the person who contributed to before me was absolutely right to point out the terror that is present in Bacon's work, and how terrifying it must have been to live under the threat of nuclear holocaust, how terrifying it must have been to feel trapped in your sexuality, how terrifying it must have felt to be trapped in the nuclear family with an abusive father, that feeling of isolation, of loneliness, of what John Molyneux, I think rightly says, is alienation, I think is absolutely deeply political. Of course, it's possible to argue that these were just abstract things, not truly relating to the material world, but why would we do that? That seems a ridiculous way to understand this art, which is so powerful and so related to how the world is for so many people.
Yeah, thanks very much, comrade. The comrade just behind you there, and then the comrade down at the front here.
Thanks. Yeah, looking at that work is very. I find it exceptionally disturbing. It's very. It really does hit hard. I think it's very. I don't know. It's incredibly expressive as well. Really expressive of real. Seems to be real pain and almost torture. It's kind of a. You feel. I think you literally feel that pain. It's those torture shapes, the torture. It reminded me, and something came to mind for me, which perhaps is an odd reference, but is Goya's Disasters of War, where you see people skewered onto trees, cut into chopped into pieces, or it has that same, the sort of physicality and the expression of pain, inner pain, within the body. So it's very much about the body and the way people have pain is experienced and expressed in a very, very exceptionally powerful way. Actually, really very strong work, and also in a sense I think remains very, very powerful within contemporary times, within these times. Actually, there still is that horror and that. The kind of difficult to express it really, but the horror and the of action and the pain of living in a very difficult and broken society. Thanks.
Thanks, comrade. Comrade at the front in the green here, and then we've got no other hands up, but we've still got about 10 minutes if people want to come in, ask any questions for John, or want to make any points. We've still got plenty of time. Off you go, comrade.
Yeah, it's just a brief point. I mean, I think what Bacon means to me is what I like about his art is that it's the emotional connection, not the cerebral connection. And I think that the important thing about it is that he does actually bring out the horrors of the 20th century of industrialized murder, all the viciousness that people are capable of doing to other people. It really comes through. This does not mean that when I look at a Bacon painting, I don't want a Marxist analysis. I actually want to be emotionally connected with what's there, and I get that from Bacon. And I think that's the point that you can actually be an artist who actually understands the violence of our society without actually having anything to tell me politically, in the same way that many, many great artists are horrifically reactionary, but they can actually connect with you on an emotional level. And that, I think, is the important thing about Bacon, that he actually does actually have that emotional connection about how people are crushed and how people perpetrate violence within that society without offering any kind of political. And I don't want that from art, frankly. And that's what I think, what I get from Bacon is I see a Bacon painting and it affects me. And that's what I like about Bacon.
Thank you very much, comrade. You got the comrade at the back there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I don't know anything about art, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I've sort of stumbled into this meeting and sort of but it kind of makes me think about how little we see ugliness in sort of, I suppose technically we see it all the time, but when it's presented as something that you tend to see art as something that's supposed to be giving you something beautiful or something like that, it kind of highlights how much of our society, the ugliness is sort of hushed away and pushed to one side, and when you actually sit there and look at the ugliness, it sort of hits you in the face, which I suppose it's always there for us to see, but I suppose it's strange to think of going somewhere to experience that, if that makes sense. So.
Brilliant, thank you very much, comrade. As I said, we've still got time for a few more contributions. Yep, so we've got the comrade over there, and then the comrade at the back there.
Thank you for a great introduction to the art of Francis Bacon. I've come across his work before, but don't know too much about him or his processes, and I'd just be really interested to know about if you have any information about how he created the works, because these paintings which show such can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. So display such pain, I could imagine it would be quite a physical ordeal to go through to produce and express in that way, and I'd just be really interested because they're quite the image themselves, you can see the way that the brush has been used and the way that the paint has been applied. And when it comes to a lot of modern works, the actual act of making them themselves is like a lot of the expression, most of, sometimes even. Yeah, I just love to hear a bit more about that and about how working in that way as an artist would be influenced by the time and the working environment in the wider world as well.
Brilliant, thank you, comrade. The comrade right at the back, in the middle, and then the comrade just in front of him.
Hi. I'm not too savvy on art myself, but I just noticed that when you look at someone like Bacon's art, whilst it may not be intrinsically political, and that's maybe not what he thought of it himself when he was creating it, but it's important to remember that what you create and what you make as art has to reflect the society that you live in, and that's especially true with Bacon. If you look at his depictions of the Pope and talk about growing up with an abusive father, and if you look at that as sort of his outlook, you can see that as maybe not a political perspective, but not a perspective on the society which he lived in, which then becomes a political perspective, because by looking at society itself, you can look at the politics of that society.
Brilliant, thank you very much. We're coming right in front of him, and then, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Following on from what the previous speaker said, I think, John could defend himself, but I think it's important to say that I don't think the claim is that we can read Francis Bacon like some sort of political manifesto and read off either from the intentions of Francis Bacon or from the explicit political content of the art. Whether it's good or bad art, or whether it, that's not what we mean when we say that art is political. I think what people are saying, and John writes about this very well in his Dialectic of Art book, which I strongly recommend to people if they want a more general discussion of how Marxism looks at art, is that these kind of works give powerful expression to political, social feelings, forces, structures, and ideas. And I think it's legitimate in that context to say that if you look at these works, you get a powerful, if one-sided, expression of alienation. I mean, that's certainly what I get when I look at these works. I think they're very, very powerful in that sense. And I don't think that's unique to Francis Bacon. I mean, just thinking about some of the other forms of art that I'm probably more familiar with, but, Bob Dylan writes, When the Ship Comes in response, I think, to someone being rude to him in the reception to a hotel. But it's a really powerful evocation for me.
This is broken again. It's a really powerful evocation of what revolution looks like as well. You know, T.S. Eliot writes Proof Rock. T.S. Eliot has absolutely horrible politics on a lot of questions, but nonetheless gives this really powerful expression to alienation and what it's like to live and grow old in a particular kind of society and so on. So all of these judgments we make at art, they can't be reduced to either the intention, the explicit intention of the artist, or simply read off from the direct political content. It's about the extent to which it captures an element of our experience living in society and gives voice to it and expression to it. And I think in that sense, I think John's claims are entirely valid here. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you, comrade. Right, without further ado, I'll hand back to you, John.
Thanks very much, Hutton. Look, I thought it was a brilliant discussion. And I found many of the contributions really inspiring and making me think about things. And I don't know if I can do justice to them all in a summing up, because they come from lots of different ones. There were some that were direct questions, which I'll try and get to, and some which were things that I found very stimulating, I wanted to respond to. I think that it isn't easy actually to find the right words to express what one is saying in relation to work like this. So I really sympathise with people who I could see, how do I put this? And I think that we all have that. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment, because Matteo here, I thought, made a very important point about art and language, and I'll come back to that. Just on the question, that always comes up whenever you talk about art, about the relationship of art to politics and so on. I think, let's say, if you take the comment here said Bacon would not have attributed any of this to capitalism, you're absolutely right. I don't think he would have used that word. Oh, well, anyway, it was me who says that it's capitalism that produces a society, class society in general, but particularly the modern contemporary form, capitalism, that produces the experiences that Bacon then expresses. That's the point I'm trying to make. And I think that when we talk about the relationship between art and politics, we're always talking about a complex, mediated relationship, but very, very important in this, that we do not have a narrow understanding of what politics means. In the mainstream discourse, politics is reduced to sort of, are you Tory or are you Labour or Liberal, isn't it? Or in my case in Ireland, are you Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil or possibly Sinn Féin? But for Marxists, this is not what Marxism is an analysis of the whole of human experience. And of course Marxism deals with human emotions and how people and feelings and so on. In another writer of the time we can talk about, who was made quite an impact, was R.D. Laing, who wrote a book called The Politics of Experience, which was precisely, if you like, the politics of people's inner experience. Lang's relationship to Marxism was complicated. I wouldn't call him a Marxist, but he'd read Marx and so on. Had the collected works of Lenin, unbelievably, on his shelf. But, he was aware of that kind of thing. And I don't think we should reduce either politics or Marxism to just political programs. Political programs are very important, but it is a general analysis of society, including art and literature. Now, some of the specific questions that were very, very interesting. The factual question, comrade, about how the work was created. We kind of know this, how it was done. Not the inner aspects of it, because, the Bacon by and large kept that to himself, and I'll bring that. But we know the circumstances. He had a kind of routine, which was, which you could, a sort of circle, which you could begin with. He worked in the morning in a studio, which was an absolute mess. And you can see it if you go to Dublin to the Hugh Lane Gallery. They took this and reconstructed it, and you can look at it through windows to see his actual studio. Right, that after painting, he then went to the colony room that I mentioned in Soho, usually, which was the drinking club with other kind of bohemian and gangster types and so on. The person who said he lived in the gutters, I'm not sure. There's a famous book about it called The Gilded Gutter Life of Francis Bacon by Daniel Farson, who was also around in that world. But anyway, he would do that, and then he'd probably go on to the French House pub, and then maybe to another drinking joint later on, or to the casino. And then when he woke up, eventually, he'd start up the painting again. And we know that he painted... he didn't do much in the way of preparatory drawings, and so on. He maybe did some, but not much. Mainly worked and we know that he used photographs a lot. The painting that influenced him, particularly the Velázquez painting of Pope Innocent X, he never saw the painting, and he was sometimes in where it was, and he refused to go and see it, but he worked from photographs of it. There are complex things going on there. But a lot of the images that he used were taken from photographs, right? And he used those. And what he tended to do, he referred to it as a question of accident. But he would say he would start out doing one thing, and then an image would form in his mind, and then he would change to a different subject. Right. The painting, when I showed it for 1946 as a painting, he said it started off with him doing a bird alighting in a field, but the form suggested took him in a quite different direction. And I think what that relates to, sorry, I keep lowering them, what that relates to is the artists themselves frequently, not all are like this, but many artists, I think, they do not work from a kind of set plan or program, but images come to them that speak to them in various ways and are then likely to speak to us in various ways. So that's kind of what we know about how he did. And this brings me to the point Montaigne made about the relationship between visual art and what we say about it. Many artists, and Bacon was like this, and I referred to myself, I knew another, I'll tell a story here about another artist. I knew an artist around this time who we went to these sort of places, and he became a friend of mine, and he did this all the time. He just asked questions about his paintings. The answers he gave were either misleading or you could almost say lies. And Bacon was a bit like this. David Sylvester says to him, the Pope, is that your father? Is that a father figure? I think it kind of obviously was at some level. Not the truth. No. Henrietta Moraes, who he paints with a syringe in her arm. All right? Oh, no, nothing to do with drugs. No, I just wanted to show her, I just wanted to put a pin in. Come on. And my friend who I knew, who was sort of knew Bacon, I didn't know Bacon, but he knew Bacon. I saw him, he spent most of his life painting clowns and painting himself as a clown, a sad clown. That was the kind of major theme in his work. And some journalist came and did an interview with him and said, are you interested in clowns? He said, I have no interest in clowns whatsoever. And I said to him, I read this, I said to him, I said, I know why you did that. You wanted to see if the journalist had actually looked at your paintings or not. Did they look at the work, or were they just writing down any old? And I think there was a lot of that with artists. And I think a lot of artists feel, this is what I want to say. I didn't want to write an essay. I wanted to paint a painting. Right? And you look at my painting, please, and see what you get from it. Now, I've got a lot of sympathy with that. I spend a lot of time talking about art and writing about it and so on, but I think we should always be kind of modest about what we're doing. Some of the time it's just saying, look, this is worth having a look at. Some of the time it's saying, there's a bit of background information that you should consider. It does make a difference if you do a painting in 1944. This is not arbitrary. Artists, and Picasso said this, he said that we're people like everyone else. We feel what goes on in the world. If somebody If the Americans just explode a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, and the whole world is thinking this could be the end of the world, the end of human society. Artists are no different. They feel that. They may respond to it in a different way, but they are responding to it. You look at what artists are doing now, and I kind of predicted they would do a couple of years ago, and it's sort of already happened. They're responding to the environmental crisis. Of course they are. They see what's happening to the world and they respond to it. So I think that's reasonable. And it relates us also to the point that was made about, again, Matteo, by Berger, about the Frans Hals paintings. Wonderful paintings of the regents and regentesses of the almshouse where he was getting handouts from. And his point was, if you actually look at the painting, this is obvious. And the art world often conspires to hide what is really obvious. And I think that happens a lot. And a lot of the time what's going on in Bacon is obvious, and he didn't necessarily want to talk about it, but we can see it if we look. And it's one of the things I try to persuade people to do with art is to look at it. You don't have to. You don't have to take any interest in it at all. That's fine. But before you talk about it, look. You hear endless numbers of people say Andy Warhol painted celebrity and glamour. Look at Andy Warhol's pictures of Marilyn Monroe. He's not. This is not romanticizing glamour. Just look at it and you'll see. And I think that is very important. Now, there were other questions that, now I'm going to run out of time. The other thing is that sometimes, just on the art and politics, sometimes artists are a lot more political than we know, and it doesn't get mentioned because the history of art writes that out. And that's something also to be aware of. Two examples. One I always give, Michelangelo's David, which was made out of a revolt in the experience of a revolt in Florence that kicked out the Medicis. That's why it's David who slew Goliath and so on. Another example is mentioned, Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett fought in the French resistance against Hitler. You know, he wasn't non-political in that. It's not obvious in his work, but you look at the end of Samuel Beckett's work, he sort of says, I can't go on, I will go on. There's resistance there in that. So there's often more politics than we realise. The triptych as a form, I'm running out of time, but anyway, the triptych as a form, I think there is a dialectical element to it. It relates to Cubism as well, in that it is often involves painting a theme sometimes, or sometimes a subject, from different points of view simultaneously, which is important. There's an important essay by John Berger on the moment of Cubism, which explores that, and I think that's sometimes also going on in the triptychs as well as the religious references and so on. Now, I'm also going to say the point about the crucifixion. There's a lovely, famous line in Marx where Marx says that the key to the Holy Family is the earthly family. And I would apply that also to the paintings of the crucifixions, including Rembrandt's slaughtered ox and so on. And that is that the key to the crucifixion of Christ is the crucifixion of humanity. Ultimately, that's its ultimate root, and that's the appeal of the image. And I'm finally going to show a couple more slides. Often the work which seems, I must say about the speaker who spoke about Van Gogh from the back, and who said they didn't know anything about art, and then made I thought a really fascinating contribution about Van Gogh, from which I learned, and I've just been looking at Van Gogh's work. The interesting thing about Van Gogh in this respect, and this goes back to the politics of experience, is what goes on in Van Gogh is this extraordinary intensity of relationship between the artist and whatever he's looking at. you know, whether it's a starry sky or whether it's a cypress tree or whether it's a person or a wheat field. It's like an extraordinary degree of sensitivity and response to what he's saying. One that kind of is more or less incompatible with normal life under capitalism. It really puts him under stress. It's not surprising he had difficulties with it, but that it had scientific validity, I think is absolutely fascinating. And I think it's because he had that intense relationship with the way the, you know, the trees would be moving or the wind would be blowing and so on, and I would like to explore that further. Yeah, I've got to sum up. Right, but I'm going to abuse things. I was in two minds about showing this. The next images I'm going to show, because I think it's really horrific, but I think it is to do, and it's a connection I can't prove, but it's a point I want to make, and that is that work that we think is not realistic often is, in a strange way, extremely realistic, like with Van Gogh. Yeah, work that we think of as not realistic is often extremely realistic. Right. World War I facial injuries. These are photographs. Right. World War I produced an exceptional level of facial injuries because people were fighting in trenches. You put your head up over the trench and you get a bullet or shrapnel or whatever. These are actual photographs. They were also drawn and there were paintings representing them. Now look at Bacon. A triptych. 3 studies for a self-portrait. Look at the relationship there. I mean, it's horrific even to contemplate, is it not? And I did think, shall I show it, shan't I? Because it is disturbing, to put it mildly. But the discussion kind of made up my mind because a lot of people were talking about this. I can't prove that Bacon had seen those images, but he probably had. He lived through that period, he grew up in it, he probably knew about that. And I think that you see these connections. Yeah, I've got to stop, which is fine. I'll end on that. And I repeat, that to be able to do that in art, it's not the whole picture, but it is crucial. And it does, Tom Woods was saying about related to join the SW, it does because we want to resist and overthrow the world that produces that and is still producing it now in Ukraine and elsewhere. So I do think it relates to building this.